A pleasure to meet all at last, and here, it's pretty early in the morning here on December 23rd, but I'd say with all the new things that are coming around, it might as well be time that I do get to have some time to work on some other projects of mine. And as we know, Nerf Secret Reveal Tears of the Clown happens to be one of those projects of mine. So as per usual, why don't we shrink ourselves down to this particular corner, and just like that, we have ourselves the tier list with a new series of Nerf blasters ready for rankings. This in particular will be about the Vortex line. I feel like that's something I could have touched up on a long time ago, since after all, the Vortex line has been rather dormant, much less discontinued at this point. So at this point, it might as well be time that I do get to put these in the rankings, by all accounts. So without further ado, let's get started on this whole thing. I basically have my notes jotted down, and the first thing we're going to focus on is the Proton, the blaster that started it all in 2011 when the series first came out. And you know what, when it did, it was more than just a revolutionary new series that Nerf came up with. A great new idea for those that are looking to have duration based on flight time as well as hang time. XLR discs were known to glide through the air. The combination of their rubber and foam construction allowed for easy prevention of destruction of certain delicate or fragile objects, while also allowing the discs to ricochet off of walls and certain surfaces, and also have better hang time in flight thanks to their lightweight construction and somewhat aerodynamic profile. In contrast to what we've seen with Nerf darts, many of which nowadays can fly way better than what we've seen in the past. And that's because some much older darts like the Streamlines or Whistlers were known to be a little heavy and have some not so great foam, mostly for cheapness. But in all accounts, the Proton was the first one to start off a whole new tradition for Nerf, and I feel like that with that in mind, its one disc capacity and ability to have only one disc at the time pretty much makes it the Jolt equivalent, even though it's way larger in size, and you could probably hang this off of a carabiner, as some people have been able to do so with other smaller size blasters. But for a blaster that started it all, we can at least give it the doubt and the benefits of anything that it was the start of something new, something really big. And with that in mind, while it's one disc capacity and shot fired only one disc at a time technically does hinder it, we'll just simply be fair enough to give it a C for this point. And next we have ourselves the Vigilon, the second blaster in the series, the first to hold a larger capacity. And of course, it's the first of all the Vortex blasters to use a slide system at the top. Quite similar in a ways to the Maverick, Strong Arm, or even the Cyclone Shock. So the Vigilon was pretty much quite a step up in contrast to what we've seen with the Proton. But I can't exactly be sure if this is supposed to be in any ways better in comparison. This, of course, also has had multiple color schemes. The Vigilon, Proton, and a bunch of the other blasters have had repaints and reschemes and re-releases in several different times, especially throughout the 2010s. But in terms of the Vigilon, no matter what the color it is, no matter what discs that it shoots, or anything else, it's also one of the blasters to have a tactical rail. So with a 5 disc capacity, slide pump at the top, similar in design to other blasters like the ones I've previously mentioned and whatnot, this does in fact allow it to have quite an advantage over the Proton, and therefore a B is what I'll give this one. So with that in mind, I'd say we're rolling along pretty well, but here's where we get into probably the better equivalent of all the Vortex blasters themselves. We have ourselves the Praxis. Now there's no Vortex in this, but there is a lot of Vortex power in this regard. So, corrected my own typo there. But in any case though, the Praxis is even bigger and better, believe it or not. Because this is, after all, a blaster that comes with a magazine, comes with its own stock, which of course is actually compatible with other blasters. I've taken the stock of the Praxis and I've put it on many other blasters. It's a little average in any ways, kind of like with the Recon CS6 being in that slim profile, which makes it a little bit bendy and malleable in a way. It technically is a bit of a risky move though, because you never know. If you put on too much pressure, you could snap it in half. So I wouldn't exactly put a lot of points on that part. But the fact that it's backwards compatible with other lineups is good enough, the way I see it. The main advantage though that this holds up is the fact that it's magazine powered and it has 10 discs fully loaded in it. But there are in fact other clip options that you can put in, because similar in ways to N-Strike or N-Strike Elite, there were in fact different magazine options. Not just the 10 disc magazines, but there were others, which I'll get to in a moment. But of course, with this being a 10 round blaster, you could, of course, use others if you like. But I really enjoyed this blaster. I enjoyed it so well, it was one of a kind. It probably does deserve a good fair ranking like what I've done with the Proton and Vigilon. But this is kind of where I technically reach new heights within the series. When I got a hold of the Praxis, it was unbelievable. The fact that I was able to pump out 10 rounds in mere seconds, that goes to show that this was actually a blaster meant for me. If there's one drawback though, apart from the stock being a little flimsy, it would probably be the fact that this is a blaster that is not Slamfire compatible. Although some people could actually put up mods to make this have the ability to slam fire through all of the discs within the magazine. So, call me crazy or whatnot, but this is the blaster that's going in the A. Right then and there, I feel like I have definitely reached the peak of this whole thing. But hey, we're not done yet, because there was a fourth and final blaster that came along during the initial run of 2011 with the Vortex line itself, the Nitron. Now this, I feel like, is actually where the series itself came into full circle. Because there were three unique things about the Nitron that certainly were able to overshadow the likes of the other blasters. The Nitron itself came with its own exclusive scope, which was powered by a few AAA batteries, but it had the opportunity of a lifetime. Something big that Nerf managed to put in. A nice innovation which allowed for LEDs to activate within the scope. It could blink, it could strobe, sort of like the turn signals you'd find on your car, especially in the back. And then of course, it was powered by 6C batteries, which I'll talk more about that later. Not to mention there was a built-in grip and a 20 round magazine. So 20 rounds, it's definitely a big upgrade over the Praxis, and definitely better than the likes of what we've seen from the Proton and Vigilon. Those could probably work as some good potential sidearms. However, even with all the amazing stuff that the Nitron was able to piece together for the series, there are unfortunately some pretty big drawbacks that prevent it from being a big blaster. One that is worth it of the ages. Even though I got this as a birthday gift in 2012, it's quite unfortunate for me to say that, admittingly, there were a few things about it that really set it back further than the likes of the other three blasters that were around at the time. First of all, the Nitron was crazy expensive at $70 in retail price. That alone is pretty impressive. I mean, the fact that they basically sold off the Stampede ECS and Vulcan EBF 25, for example, those blasters were similarly priced, but you could actually get even more bang for your buck there. And on top of that, you had to buy 6C batteries just to make it run. So that alone is unbelievable. The Praxis, Vigilon, and Proton used the likes of mechanisms within the blasters, through the usage of priming, of course. But the Nitrons simply had to utilize full auto and semi-auto capabilities with a rather slow feed system. Yeah, that's right. Just to have full auto means you're basically pumping less than 2 discs per second. In contrary, we could find blasters like the Stampede and Vulcan, both of which are full auto, and they can basically spit out more than 3 darts per second on average, depending on what batteries you have. There, of course, were the famous Trust Fire mods that have been all around YouTube between 2010 and 2014, and a lot of those videos had Trust Fire powered blasters, and they were unbelievable in terms of the fire rate and just the fact that you could empty clips way faster than the norm. Now, I'm sure that the Nitron has been done in similar ways, but just to know the fact that right in the factory run, this thing was meant to run on 6C batteries. It's costly, but D batteries and usage of some other blasters, we don't see C battery powered blasters all that often, even to this day. There's only a few that we have since the Nitron came and went. But probably the biggest problem that I've had with this blaster, I mean, the price alone, the battery costs, additional money, then you have a slow rate of fire, but one big problem is there. It turns out the discs actually do not shoot directly forward. No, they shoot at angles usually to the left. Okay. I don't even know how that's possible. For the discs to just fly at angles away from the line of fire that you're intending to use. Like if you're pointing completely straight, chances are your disc would fly to the left of your target. Especially in coherence with the likes of the distance of the target. Like if your target was a little closer, you probably would have a chance of hitting your mark, but not dead center like you would hope for. And on top of that, what if it were far away? You wouldn't be able to hit it. It would just fly away from it. That's a really big problem. But hey, I don't intend on going all that hard on there trying to find every possible flaw on this blaster in the same way that I have found flaws on some of the other blasters. The Praxis was almost perfect for what it was. But the Nitron, supposedly being a bigger and even better innovation in many ways, being the first battery-powered blaster, the first full auto Vortex blaster, and the first blaster to have a scope attachment, exclusive, with strobing effects. I mean, those were all impressive new innovations that Hasbro put together for this fourth and final blaster. But hey, you know what? It's okay. Because you know what happened, basically? This is basically where we get into some more territory, because as the years came around, we actually had some more blasters. So, basically speaking, while the Nitron's at C, we're going to go and move on to the Lumitron. Just another Praxis. But there is one other unique innovation. As we have seen with the N-Strike Raven CS18, we have the Lumitron CS10, which itself was basically a blaster that had its own glow-in-the-dark capabilities. You see, the blaster itself was painted in an amazing chartreuse-style lime green coloring, in the same way that we have seen the Raven being in that specific paint job, because both of these blasters were a part of a glow-in-the-dark series. While it ran short, unfortunately, the blaster at least gave us something new and exciting. In addition to having a magazine itself, which could hold 12 discs instead of 10, it could also glow in the dark with a unique series of blue LEDs and some exclusive glow-in-the-dark discs. Although there were also refill packs that you could buy as well, which mostly were enough to fill the entire clip. Not necessarily capacity options or quantity of discs, unlike with most Vortex disc packs. But in any case, the Lumitron CS10, which itself had a 12 dart magazine, I don't know why exactly it didn't say CS12 in contrast to what most other blasters would have, but no matter what the case, the discs or darts doesn't really matter by any means, how much it holds or whatnot. After all, Hasbro had been rather stingy, not always packing as much ammo as the magazines or whatnot would usually require for you to be fully prepared for any war. But anyways, Lumitron was awesome. I feel like it would have been better than the likes of the Praxis, except for the fact that it's the same exact design. So that really hampers it by any means. But I loved this blaster. While it's not exactly perfect, it can go right in B, right behind the Praxis. So I feel like if it was a more original design, then maybe I would have given it even more points, possibly beating the Praxis. But anyways, here we go with another personal favorite of mine, known as the Diatron. The Diatron, much like the Lumitron, was also in a somewhat short-lived series known as Multi-Shots Madness, alongside the Elite Rough Cut 2x4. But basically, while it does have the same type of firing style, being able to shoot multiple projectiles at once, which, unlike the darts on the Rough Cut, this had discs. This was basically the first blaster that we had that was able to shoot multiple discs at once. It had a unique handle on the side, lever-like basically, that would allow for 2 discs to be loaded. And admittingly, there have been a few videos I've seen where it is crazy daunting to try and get, because it's very specific that you gotta have all the locks disabled while swinging it outwards before you can pull it back in to fully prime it and then fire. It has a capacity of 10 discs, which is much like with the Praxis's 10 dart clip, or basically with 10 dart clips in general. It operates probably better than the likes of the Vigilon if you can do it correctly. It also has probably the best grip and weight distribution of all the blasters. Basically, its larger capacity and its unique ability to fire multiple discs at once gives it a lot of points. But as stated before, pretty much not all the blasters are basically considered perfect. And I feel that that is more than what can be truly said about it. Like I said though, a lot of these new and unique innovations that Hasbro's been coming up with throughout the whole entirety of the series. I mean, the Proton having 1 disc opportunity, making it a Jolt equivalent with a larger profile in contrast to a Jolt. Then you have the Vigilon, which has, well, a priming slide and, well, a door that basically exposes the innards of the storage clip. And then you have then the Praxis basically has itself actual magazines along with the Lumitron, and then the Nitron, while it has itself a larger clip, can also use automatic firing through a motorized flywheel system. But for the Diatron, having itself a number of things can actually make it even better than the likes of most of the rest. So it goes up at B. Here we have the next blaster on the list, which is the Pyragon. Now, even though I've mentioned that the Praxis was certainly the best blaster at the time, my life was so changed for the better, I'd say, because by 2014, this was the point in history where the Vortex line really was at the peak of its popularity. And I feel like that's not only true because of the fact that it was a series of disc blasters, which itself, compared to darts, could handle a lot better in many ways. But in 2013, when this came out, it was insanely amazing. The Pyragon itself had tactical rails and a stock attachment point, which would allow for the Praxis stock, or basically any stock that you desire to use on the Pyragon, quite a cinch. Simply snapping it, or any other attachments that you felt like, could be easier done than flipping on light switches. But the main innovation about the Pyragon, in contrast to what we've seen from all the blasters thus far, the Diatron could fire multiple discs, the Praxis and Lumitron, as well as the Nitron, could handle magazines, and with some of the others having their own unique innovations, the Pyragon had a drum magazine. Yes, that's right, a drum magazine. 40 discs! That's even bigger than the likes of the Raider CS35 or Rampage CS25. A lot of the drum magazines from the Dart series of blasters could barely even hold close to that amount. I mean, you have the Alpha Troopers 18 Dart drum magazine, then the 25 Dart drum magazines, or the 35 Dart drum magazines. But oh my gosh, the Pyragon's 40 disc magazine really is as high of a step up as you would have ever realized in your whole life. The Pyragon is, yeah, just absolutely perfect. No doubt about that. So, S ranking it goes. Yeah. If you think that's crazy, oh man, think about how crazier I can possibly get with this whole thing. Here we have ourselves another big blaster, which came out later in the year 2013. The Vortex 360. Oh boy, you know, unlike with the drum magazine that would come separate with the Pyragon, the Vortex 360 would basically utilize its own built-in drum magazine, which could simply be loaded through several different chambers. By simply inserting a disc, one at a time, that itself would allow the drum to eventually be fully loaded. Granted, the drum magazine from the Pyragon also had to be loaded in a certain way. You simply stuff the main tube with discs, and then using a small switch on top of the drum that would allow you to switch to a different chamber within the drum. There were 4 chambers in total, each of which could hold up to 10 discs. And basically, when you basically add the good amount of discs to the rest of the blaster, that would give it its unique 40 disc count, amongst all things considered, while the Vortex 360 could only hold 30. This, I feel like, would be a bit of a step down from the Pyragon and its own disc magazine. But still, the Vortex 360 had itself a pretty unique charm. It had a similar profile to that of the Pyragon, being that it used a hand grip as the priming mechanism for the blaster. And I wouldn't say that it's that smooth in contrast to the Pyragon, mostly because of the fact that it has its own heavyweight system. A combination of springs as well as turning mechanisms, which would allow the drum to automatically rotate and feed a disc directly into the firing chamber, that itself would take a little more force in contrast to simply loading a disc from the drum magazine of the Pyragon. And so it could be a bit of a workout. It's probably one of the most toughest prime systems I might have felt. It would give my arm a bit of a workout every time I primed the blaster. So the Vortex 360 has some unique things about it, and being that it was definitely the peak of the Vortex series because there were so many amazing things happening with it by this point, I feel like that by the end of 2013, I had actually walked away with 6 Nerf blasters that Christmas. And this was actually one of those, for the record. And well, 10 years later, I not only feel like this was definitely one of the best blasters, it basically had the same kind of stuff as the Pyragon did. It has a drum magazine, a foregrip that doubles as a priming system, and a tactical rail on the top, as well as a stock attachment. Pretty much all the same things that the Pyragon had, but the drum was built into the blaster, as opposed to it being separate. And the fact that it's very heavy in contrast to the Pyragon's rather smooth, light prime, which simply feeds discs directly to the priming and firing chamber, and the Vortex had to use a little bit extra force just to even load one disc into the chamber. I feel like those things hamper it a bit. It's 30 disc capacity as opposed to the Pyragon's 40 disc capacity. Again, a few things hamper it. So it's almost a perfect blaster, much like what I have mentioned about the Praxis, and the Pyragon was way over the top with all of this stuff. And just right there at the peak of the mountaintop. And I feel like the Vortex 360 follows closely behind, so we'll just simply leave it at the A mark, pretty much. Unfortunately, the Vortex lineup wouldn't exactly continue very far, because Nerf was actually continuing more so with some newer series that they had launched, like the Zombie Strike and Rebel series. Not to mention, since the Elite lineup was getting even more successful by this point, especially with blasters like the Rapid Strike, and even the newly formed Mega lineup, considering the fact that the Centurion and Magnus were already out by the time 2013 came to an end and well into 2014, Nerf would instead allow the Vortex system to merge together with the Zombie Strike line, giving us 3 new blasters to look out for. One of these is known as the Fuse Fire. Now, I'll just simply say right up front that while the Zombie Strike Vortex blasters, again, weren't exactly made to be perfect, that's something that we pretty much have to expect, I would simply point out the fact that the Fuse Fire actually is probably the best of the 3. And I mean that. I'll explain more about the rest later on. Anyways though, the Fuse Flyer has a 5-disc capacity, room for 5 more discs with included disc storage below the barrel, and itself has a priming rod which automatically flings back. Basically, a mover system which allows the disc to be fed into the priming chamber. Plus, this is actually the 2nd disc blaster that uses glow-in-the-dark technology. A series of blue lights can be seen within the chamber that you feed the discs through in order for them to be fed directly into the priming chamber. This allows the discs to have that signature glow feeling on it, much like what we've seen from the likes of the Raven and other glow-related blasters that had that type of function. Also, the fact that it had some other unique bits, like a tactical rail and even a sling mount on the bottom, they do allow for some things to happen. Unfortunately, this is one of those cases where a Vortex blaster is again going to be hampered by the likes of heavy weight. While the Diatron could do a really good job at allowing the weight to be evenly balanced and distributed across the entire length and width of the blaster, in spite of its rather bulky nature, I would say the Fuse Fire has a similar level of bulk to it, but because of the usage of its glow-in-the-dark technology, which is like the Lumitron's clip, powered by AAA batteries, this in turn does allow for it to unfortunately suffer from the likes of uneven weight distribution. You'd likely have to have both of your hands active just to be able to hold it properly without it feeling uncomfortable, unless you're rather strong and able to carry such heavy loads. While this is definitely nothing relative to anything heavy that I've carried over my whole life, it's unfortunate that the Zombie Strike series of Vortex blasters eventually just cut themselves short. So, the Fuse Flyer, while it does alright at what it is, goes to C. But believe it or not, the Rip Shot is pretty bad. And I mean bad. Considering that I've mentioned the Proton can only hold 1 disc at a time and fire 1 disc at a time, and many of the other blasters could do the same thing, fire 1 at a time, with the Diatron being the only exception, as it was a multi-shot Madness blaster. But unfortunately, the Rip Shot's pretty bad. And I'm not joking at this point. This is where I feel like the series has gone badly downhill. And by 2014, it should be of no surprise. The Rip Shot is not a good blaster. It can hold 1 disc at a time, as stated before, and of course, can only fire 1 at a time. But in this case, we have a blaster that doesn't exactly work all that well. It has a priming system at the top, much like what the Vigilon has, but unfortunately it confuses the crap out of you. What you're supposed to do, supposedly, with this blaster is feed a disc into the chamber first and then pull back the priming handle, as there's a lock that'll prevent it from moving. That is rather confusing to some people out there. They might mistake it for being like the Vigilon and pull the handle back first, only to realize that it's locked. And they'll believe that it's not working. Money down the drain. It might have disk storage and even has itself a handguard, as basically the grip basically just loops back into the front of the blaster, creating that unique profile. But other things aside, it just doesn't do very well. It barely even gets that kind of good range, and it doesn't fire very far. And not to mention the discs can just straight up fall down to the ground most of the time instead of flying smoothly like what we've seen with pretty much every other blaster that's been around since day 1. I mean, what happened? Okay, so this is basically my first D ranking for the Vortex line. But then, here we go. The Ricochet. Yeah. The same exact thing as the Rip Shot. Just on a much, much smaller scale. So, if you're looking for a Vortex Jolt, this would be the one. It does no better, though, than the Rip Shot. Possibly even worse. So, enough said. And so, well, basically, if you're looking for me to talk about the VTX blasters, not much could be said. They're just recolorings of the Paragon, Praxis, and Vigilon. So, I guess not much more could be said about the Vortex line entirely. And I guess, after all that's been said and done, we're pretty much at the end of this presentation. And I've had a lot to say about the Vortex line, so this might be the format for the future, as I'll have plenty of things to talk about based on other lineups soon enough. And so, with all this in mind, thank you for watching this piece, and I will see you next time in Tears of the Clown, plus a lot more for Nerf Secrets Revealed.